Hi, I'm Scott Cuthbert, co-founder of Safeopedia, and we're back for another episode of Safeonomics. So we're bringing Pete Susca back for part 3 of 3, which may turn into part 3 of 4. But Pete's coming back today to talk about the business value of common safety language and how important it is to get your organization aligned as to what safety is and what safety means to not just you as an individual, but to the organization as a whole. And we get into lots of great examples as per usual, and lots of great suggestions and tactics that you can take back to your organization in order to improve the language of safety for everyone in the organization. So sit tight and get ready for Pete to download lots of great information. All right, well, we're back with another episode of Safeonomics with Pete Susca from OpX Consulting. If you've been tuning in, this is part 3 of 3. So we've had I've had the pleasure of talking with Pete. We started out with it's always bigger than safety. You know how safety outcomes are symptomatic a lot of times of deeper issues that organizations are dealing with. And Pete provided some insights and some great examples on how to peel back those issues and then increase your organizational value was part 2, which we know was another great episode. And then today we're going to be diving into the business value of common safety language, which was important. And again, reflecting back on the Safety on the Edge conference, there was a presentation around metaphors and how we use language in safety. So looking forward to jumping into this one, Pete.
Me too.
Yeah. Great.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming back. Do you want to take a minute and introduce the topic?
Yeah, sure. Well, welcome everybody. I see this every day. And at different levels of the organization and across the organization, when people use the word safe or unsafe, they're usually not referencing it from the same perspective. And it's human nature that weaves its way into organizations, and humans validate safe and unsafe by their history, by their perception, by their, scars, by things they've learned. And if you got 50 people, they've all got different ways of doing that to some degree, or they're looking at different things, or looking at them differently. They think they're talking the same language. I've got this slide that's got a kitty and a lion on it, right? And these two people are talking, looking at the same cat, but there's one seeing it as a kitty and the other one seeing it as a lion, right? And where does that come from? That comes from their history, all of this stuff that I was talking about. And so now when you go into an organization, I just was with an organization the other day, they said, we want to get 0, 0, whatever, right? And I said, okay, so I drew a target, and outer rings and inner rings and the bullseye. And I said, let's look at 0 as the bullseye. So the only way that we're all going to possibly get to 0 is if we're all aiming at 0. And I said, it's about the aiming, okay? And I said, if we're not all aiming the same way in the same place, then we have no chance of all of us getting to 0, okay? And you can debate whether 0 is the right number or not, but it's fine with me. But you have to understand what it takes to get there, right?
Right.
And what it takes to get there has to be calibrated around risk, and risk has to be measured the same way. And then when we have this standard of care, then we can measure the risk that we have now to the risk that we need to get there. And until you can do that, you can't bring the front sight and the back sight in line with the target, right? I mean, that's my analogy, but it works. And it's the aiming. It's the aiming. And so the challenge is is how do we get the organization who's got all of these different ways of looking at safe, unsafe from a perception perspective, everybody looking at it the same way, saying the same thing about it. And I spend a lot of time rebuilding that way of looking and talking. Um,
Right.
and and the other challenge is if you're in the safety profession, right? And we're risk calibrated, right? So we're taught to look at risk, the probability of harm, right? And the leadership team, when they're looking at it, they're looking at history of harm. Okay. And they're very far apart. Um, because, when we start talking about hazards and talking about severity, a lot of people look at severity from their history of harm from that hazard. Well, if you haven't got killed standing next to the train, you may start to lose appreciation for how much energy there is there, how much severity capacity there is there, right? And there are a lot of people who've gotten, nicked by trains, and don't fully respect the capacity for harm in these hazards, or they haven't gotten hit by a train, right? So we can't use that. We cannot use that to get us together to this place, this bullseye. Okay. Um, the other piece of it is, and we've talked about this along the way, safety is an indicator. We have to stop fixing safety and start understanding where the imbalance of risk is coming from. And the best place to do that is process health. Now, somewhere in the future, maybe we can dive into process health. But process health to me is the most interesting thing there is in an operation because it really tells you a lot about how the organization makes decisions and what's acceptable and what isn't. And that then centers around how people make decisions and what they're responsible for. And we're going to talk a little about gatekeeping today, which what I call hazard and risk gatekeeping, which is all of the people in the leadership of the organization should have a responsibility for weighing the weight of safety in the decisions they make, whether they're HR folks hiring people or their procurement folks procuring stuff or contractors or whatever it is. Everybody's got to have that responsibility, and then they've got to have the capacity to measure risk so it doesn't get into the process in a kind of an excessive way. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, great. Well, maybe then we'll kick things off. Just talk about methods you found to be most effective for aligning the definition of safety across the organization. Obviously, you've got different departments and different perspectives and different,
Sure.
people with different backgrounds. So how do you bring them all together?
Well, first, I always tell people, people don't like solving problems that they don't see as a problem. So it's like AA, right? You got to get somebody to look in the mirror and say, I'm an alcoholic, right? And so that's the first thing that needs to happen here is they need to recognize what they're measuring and what they're confident in may not be robust enough, aligned enough, whatever it is, to get them to the place they need to go. And I have this little thing that I do with this rock falling slide, and it's got, 5 situations where there's a big rock in the air, right? And there's the first one is the rock in the air, and the second one is the rock in the air with somebody next to it, underneath it. And then the third one is the rock falling and missing the person. And the fourth one is the rock falling, hitting the person's foot. And then the fifth one is the rock falling and hitting the person on the head. And I'll say to everybody, this is the same rock. It's the same height. It's the same mass when it falls in the same spot. Hazard, right? Okay. And I say, the first question I ask them is, which of these hazards is the greatest severity hazard? And some people will say the fatality situation. And a lot of folks will say They're all the same. And that's the right answer. They're all the same. The severity is in the hazard, right? It's in this case physics, right? It's height and mass, okay? Gravity, okay? Physics, right? And what I always tell people is if you want to change a hazard, you got to change physics or chemistry. Okay? If you're not changing physics or chemistry, you are not changing the hazard. Maybe changing something else, but you're not changing the hazard. So now that I got them to agree, I'll say to them, now over here on the right is this person hit and killed by that rock, and over here on the left is just a rock up there, right? And I'll say to them, do you treat this rock like you treat that rock? And that's when they'll look at their feet and they'll go, well, we'd like to, or they'll say stuff like that. No, 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 today. And they'll say, no, we treat that rock much different than we treat that rock. I said, that's where the problem is. See, you need harm. People need history. People need proof that rock can kill somebody. And that is not the way that we need to go about
Right.
managing risk, is waiting for harm to prevent harm. Okay? Sorry, doesn't make any sense. So what we've got to be able to do is when we see that rock, we've got to be able to see it like that situation. We've got to
Right.
be able to connect the two, not wait for this one, but see that in this.
Yeah.
Okay. And act on it like you would if somebody just died. And when you're there, then you'll be in true fatality prevention mode or serious injury or whatever the capacity of harm that rock is, right? And I start with fatalities and serious injuries because you can't make this point for fatalities. Good luck with the rest of them, right? So you got to start with the big stuff. Get them to get the big stuff right, that is undeniable, and then
Yeah.
work from there, right? And to do that, I start by separating hazard from risk and getting them to focus hazards. You would not believe how easy it is for people to get wrapped around the axle looking at something simple because they're extrapolating in their history and risk and all these things. No, 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 no risk, hazard. And I know this has come into the forefront recently, but I've been using energy as for hazard severity calibration for a long time. And energy is the best, I think, way to go because once you get everybody looking at energy, you've taken them away from their history. Okay.
Right.
I don't care about your history with this rock. We're all going to measure the same thing the same way, and that's going to be energy as capacity for harm or severity, right? What is
Right.
the energy in this situation, practice, or condition, right? And then we have a way to calibrate that. Okay. Um, and then basically we practice it. I show them pictures. We talk about situations, conditions. A good example is I'll take a chair. Everybody's pretty good at conditional hazards. I said, well, I put a chair out in the middle of the room. Everybody in the room sitting on a chair, just like this. And I'll say, this chair hazard. Yeah. Big one, middle one, low one, right? Degrees. Moderate. Okay, fine. I'll stand off to the side. Am I a hazard? And I'll kind of smile. And they'll say, well, yeah, you could be. I said, okay. I said, watch me stand on the chair. Now, is that a bigger hazard? Yeah. I said, where does that come from? Where do these two moderate energy sources or things you can walk by every single day turn into this serious injury hazard? How did that happen? And they said, it was you. I said, it's all of us. I said, we're all energy sources. And we can choose to use that energy any way we want to in your plant, business, or whatever it is. We are like batteries, right? We are energy sources. So when you're going out looking for hazards, and ultimately risk, you've got to ask not just what people do or see what people do. You have to look at what they can do. Okay, because
Right.
they can do a lot more and they can create a lot more hazard than you're going to see any given day. Okay. So I give them, I teach them, I retrain their way of looking at hazard and ultimately risk. And then I help them find the line of what tolerable risk is based on that zero or whatever expectation for risk they are saying that they need to get to where they want to go. And that, takes the better part of a day to get
Yeah.
people at least talking the right way. And you have to practice that because you're undoing something they've learned their whole life and getting them to
Mhm.
talk and see differently. Because when you put a situation up that's got multiple hazards in it, I have a situation that's got a forklift in it. It's raising something up. And I'll say, what's the hazard? And they'll say, the forklift. The forklift? And I guarantee you, the 5 people that say forklift, they're all looking at a different hazard aspect of that forklift.
Right.
Now, are we going to get to the same place? Are we going to be in agreement? No, because we're looking at the same thing, saying the same thing, like the kitty and the lion, but we're not seeing it the same way, and we're not going to have an agreement because we're not even talking the same language. So you got to break all that down. So that's,
Yeah.
in essence, what I do.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
The,
And I
the
can
other,
see,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
No, the other key point of this, and this, I'm just going to give you a taste of this. And if I'm doing this for senior leadership team, I'll say, look, the hazards in your corner, the hazard, and not just from a hierarchy of risk perspective, a hierarchy and control perspective, but the hazard is the first decision. You've got hazards in this business for a good reason. Prove it to me. Prove it to yourself that all your fatality hazards are the best way to do something. The best quality, the best throughput, the best schedule, the best, right? Prove to me that's the best business way of doing whatever you're doing to invite in that fatality hazard. See, I'm turning the tables. Now we all agree this thing is going to can kill somebody and take
Right.
away the probability, take away the risk. Just look at the hazard. Why is it here? Is it essential? Is it the best way? And then have them go prove that with the business data. And if you can't prove it with the business data, get rid of it.
Right.
Don't don't buy controls for the rest of your life. Don't spend money on abating the risk and all that stuff. Get rid of it. And there are a lot of hazards that I stumble across that just don't make any business sense. They've been there a long time. People are used to them, comfortable with them.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, no, I think that's great. So, you're talking about some of the exercises and sort of the thought experiments that you're taking people through. So how can visual tools and language consistency be used to reduce the reliance on individual experience or that individual judgment or perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I've built some tools and I kind of custom build them for the expectations, like the expectations of the organization and how they slice everything from low, moderate, high when it comes to hazards and risks. And we get this basically stoplight chart, which is green, yellow, and red. And it's a field tool. I say field tool. It's so that a supervisor and a worker looking at the same thing can end up agreeing on whether it's safe, it's unsafe, or it's an imminent danger. And in your operation, if you can get people to classify things in one of those 3 categories and everybody does it the same way, you're on a good road. I'm not looking for, you got a 1 to 1,000 and everybody says, 56 or 95
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah.
No, we don't need that level of granularity. Okay, we need people to be able to talk about, is that acceptable to walk away from or not? Okay, and if it's not, do we have to shut down the process or not? Okay, how fast do we need to act? Right, so that's a prioritization of action and agreement process. And so I do is I build this little tool and we practice it over and over again. Go out in the shop and say, okay, let's look at this. What level hazard is it? Is there exposure? Is there potential for exposure? Yeah. Okay. Is the control up to standard? Is it safe? Right. And we kind of go from green to yellow to red. And in those red scenarios, of course, you've got a serious injury fatality hazard. You've got somebody working right under it, right near it, or the capacity to do that. And the control is just either not there or insufficient. And that's a stop the presses, right?
Yeah.
And then I talk about what you need to do in the interim, right? It's like some of these folks are like, okay, we stopped the process. Well, yeah, but do you realize you stopped the business? Okay.
Right.
So now we've got this competing interest, right? We all agree that that should be stopped, but boy, Pete, we need to get back to business. Agreed. Okay. So then we have to find a level that we can operate with that may not be the ultimate solution, but it's operable. Okay. Now that's a tricky one. It's tricky because it's culturally dependent, and controls are culturally dependent, especially if they're humanistic controls, right? You got to look at your culture. A good example is you take a checklist, which is part of a control, let's say, right? Validation of steps or process, whatever it is. And you put a checklist in the hands of a airline pilot, okay, in the cockpit. They're checking their brakes, they're checking all the radio, they're checking all the critical aspects of that plane before they fly it. And you put a similar but a little different checklist in the hands of a school bus driver. Now they both have people's lives, a lot of people's lives dependent on them and the discipline and safety of their operation of that vehicle. But in which environment, which climate or culture is that checklist going to be more reliable, more effective? It's in the airplane.
Yeah.
In the airplane. Okay, these folks are brought up in a culture, in a climate, and they sustain
Yeah.
that climate. You got pilot, co-pilot. They're checking each other, they're validating each other. That's a very healthy dynamic. Okay. Whereas school bus driver, they're by themselves, nobody's watching them, right?
Yeah.
So same control, same level of control, but very different in its efficacy. So
Right.
control efficacy is very dependent upon the culture and the climate. So you can't just say we're just going to put that control. We're going to put some gloves, give everybody gloves. Well, people don't do what they're told. Don't give them stuff that they have to do what they're told, right? Oh, I go in a lot of companies and say, "Are you guys really good at following the rules here?" And they're like, I said, "Okay, then anything associated with a rule or procedure is questionable." Really, as a
Right.
control. So you got to understand that, okay? And then I like creating a visual workplace. It's part of my upbringing in continuous improvement. And I think of visuals as, a- a- I'll tell you a story. Back when I was probably 30 years ago, a bunch of folks from, when I worked for Otis, they had a test tower, and these were all engineers, and they would basically test the elevator and test tower. And they said, Pete, we had a management system back then, and we want to be experts in safety. We want to be experts in compliance. We take these safety walks, and we always argue about whether something is compliant or not compliant. Can you teach us all the OSHA regulations? These are leadership folks. And I said, I didn't say no, but my head said no. And what I said to them is, I've got a better way. Instead of teaching you how to find problems, I'm going to teach you how to align around right. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk out into your area. We're going to identify hazards and risks and compliance risk and inherent risk. And then we're going to set that process up visually so it's easy to see right, safe, compliant, whatever the right word is, right? Whether here, we're storing cylinders, gas cylinders. Okay, so what does safe, compliant look like? Boom, 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 boom. We take pictures of right. We post those pictures in the area. They're in their little walk around book. I said, if you walk around and you look at this and it doesn't match the picture, it's wrong.
Right.
You don't need to know degrees of wrong, why it's wrong. It's wrong. Okay? Bring it back to right. See, the problem in a lot of organizations is they haven't clearly defined right. We're so busy chasing wrong and fixing things, they haven't clearly defined right. Now, when you clearly define right, it doesn't take any education. All you got to do is be able to see. I match
Right.
this up with that. If it doesn't look like that, it's wrong. See, so we've got to make the world a little more practical and simple so that anybody, and this requires no training, right? No training
Yeah.
whatsoever, can see wrong. That's what you want. You want anybody walking by to see wrong. Okay, and that's how you do it. You start with right. You clarify right. Um, so the other thing that I talk about is simplicity and visual indicators and clarity. And I use Lego instructions as my example for the ultimate work instruction. I mean, these Lego engineers design the Legos and they design the pieces and they design all this stuff, but you got to know that they really got these instructions down by watching kids, by watching kids do the thing and getting feedback from the kids. And
Right.
our kids are the employees. That's why we have to generate value from our employees. Our employees should be creating this process. Give your employees the standards of care and give them the authority to start making some of these decisions. And so now we have these Lego instructions. If you look at Lego instructions, I'll ask everybody, when you look at Lego instructions, what's missing? What's not on there? Words. There are no
Right.
words.
Yeah. Right.
And I'll say, why don't they have words? And they'll say, well, because kids can't read. I said, okay. Oh, it could be kids in different countries. Okay. I said, but the reality is they've built this process to be so visual, so simple, so repeatable that it doesn't need words.
Right.
Words don't add any value. Holy smokes. Right? I mean, that's like, right? Words don't add value. It's so clear, it's so repeatable, it's so measurable. And these are principles of process health that I talk about. That anybody walking by, anybody could see that yellow piece doesn't go on there, it just doesn't fit, right? That's not right. That's the way you need to make your workplace. That's the way you make work instructions. So it doesn't take this guy to be an expert. Everybody's an expert. Everybody's looking at you and saying, wait a minute, that doesn't go there, right?
Yeah.
And that repeatability and that measurability and that simplicity is just as good for quality and cost and schedule as it is for safety, right? It's
Right.
process health. That's what it is. So um, I think there's been a lot of talk lately with HOP and all that stuff about engaging workers, but that's been in the water of continuous improvement for many, many years. Is worker-based ownership of process. And
Right.
I think that's one of the things that I talk to leadership about. Do you want your workers to be process owners? I'm not thinking just about safety, about everything, owning
Right.
everything in that process. And most of them will say yes. They just don't know how to get there.
Right.
So I have to walk them to, you're just not going to dump the responsibility on somebody. You're going to build their capacity and give them responsibility. And they're going to have to be self-accountable for building value around what the company believes it values and how it's going to operate and its imperatives and all those things. And then build their ownership and then pat them on the back, support them. It makes the supervisor's job so much easier when the employees are self-accountable and
Right.
self-responsible than having to tell people what to do every day. I mean, I got supervisors. I'm in companies with supervisors with 70 direct reports. 70 direct reports. I think, how are you managing 70 people? You're not.
Yeah.
You're not. How does somebody think that's effective? They think it's cost effective, but is it really effective? No. So, that's the chain, right? The recalibration, the measurement scheme, the simplicity, the ownership, the building ownership capacity, all of that. That's how you do it.
Yeah. Well, it just makes me think, like you said, perspective in history, and we're not really taught, that, or sorry, maybe we are taught, the organization is going to know best, management's going to know best. They're going to give you instructions on what to do, versus you're flipping that on its head a little bit, and I
Yeah.
can see, you're having to undo a lot of years of experience for people, and especially senior management that's probably been in those positions for a number of years.
I'll remember, I don't know if I told you all, but I was in the fire service for 20 years, right? So I remember when I started becoming an officer, first step in officer is a lieutenant or second lieutenant. And I used to, I was taught all of this stuff, right, about engaging with people and working with people, and and I would say to my guys, so what do you think about? What do you think we should do? What do you think? You know, they're like, well, you're the boss. You know, you're the boss. You need to tell us. I was like,
Yeah,
well, I mean, I'm working with you here. Help me out, right? And
right,
it took some time to get them to feel comfortable doing that.
right,
Um, and then because what I was trying to teach them to do is make decisions without me.
right,
Because, and I do a lot of work with first line supervisors and teaching them how to build in back of them. You know, most supervisors have leads, right? And these would be working leads or whatever it is. And I say, okay, are you teaching your lead every day to be you?
right.
No, I don't have the time. I don't have this. I don't have that. Okay,
Yeah,
well, let me show you a couple things you can do every single day, develop their capacity to be you. And the more they can start to look like you, the less weight you have in your job. Okay. So supervisors in today's world are absolutely overwhelmed.
right.
Overwhelmed. They are not doing what we think they're doing or what we're
Right.
asking them to do. They're figuring it out. And that's not good.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of safety professionals have seen that as they're trying to get, supervisors to buy into the safety program, and it's just one more straw that's gonna
Yeah, one more
break that.
weight on them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and again, that's where it's not safety that's the problem.
Right.
It's how the organization is setting them up to succeed or not succeed
Right.
by what comes down to them imbalanced, right? If
Yeah.
I'm having to juggle all of these balls because you're not sending me a beach ball,
Yeah.
okay. A beach ball is integrated, right? I've integrated into the process all of the things of value. I'm not sending all of these things, expectations down to you and having you integrate them because
Yeah.
you can't. So what do? You juggle the ball that's on fire. And then that means there's 4, 5, 6 balls at risk every single day. And those are tomorrow's fires. So that's what creates reactivity in organizations is the
Yeah.
leadership team not integrating these expectations so the supervisor has an easier job.
Yeah.
It's never going to be easy, but
Right.
we gotta make it doable.
Juggle one or two balls instead of five or six.
Exactly. So we'll start
Yeah.
putting these balls together,
Yeah.
not having the fork in the road. I think we talked about that before. Not having this choice at the coalface of should I go faster or should I be safe? We
Right.
never want to put people in that situation.
Right. So can you speak more about the role of business leaders as hazard gatekeepers? You touched on gatekeeper earlier, and just how that responsibility should be framed.
Yeah, you know, we talked about the grain scenario in one of the sessions that we did previous and how the folks in marketing or business development were extracting value out of the grain sales process and how along with that value came these fatality hazards because they were keeping that low quality grain too long. And when you dug into and these are senior folks in the company, when you dug into their roles and responsibilities, safety was not a role. It's not a responsibility. So, I mean, it's not even on the radar screen. Okay.
Right.
So now we got to start with, okay, what is your role in safety relative to the kinds of decisions you make, whether you're in HR, you're in quality, you're in legal, whatever it is. What is your role? Because we're trying to get zero out there. Okay. And you're making the first hazard decision. You're you're opening the door for the hazard. These are the people that are inviting hazards. Engineering, procurement, all of this. They're inviting hazards in. Come on in. Okay. So when you're inviting this into your house, you should have some responsibility for that. And in turn, accountability. In between responsibility and accountability is how.
Right.
Okay. So one, it starts with responsibility. And I think a lot of people talk accountability first. You don't talk accountability is downstream. Okay. If you haven't given person a value for something, you haven't told them that it's their responsibility to do X with it. And then three, taught them how to deploy that responsibility and then measured them appropriately on that. Don't try to hold somebody accountable. These all these things have to be in place first. Okay. So that's what I build is I build that system. Okay. So what should HR's role be? And what should their responsibilities in selecting people, onboarding people, determining how many supervisors or capacity of supervisors, teaching supervisors. How many companies do I go in? Well, we've never taught the supervisors how to lead. I mean, just lead, not safety.
Right.
Lead. Or taught supervisors how to talk with people, asking questions and being
Yeah.
inquisitive, things like that. We haven't taught them those skills. And what happens is when you haven't taught people the skill set, they get out of balance. And what
Right.
happens is they figure out a way to make the people above them happy without getting in trouble. Okay. And when you see that, you'll see what I'm talking about. You'll see somebody that's really good at making the boss happy with productivity, but they're not so good at safety. And the
Right.
boss is so enamored with the productivity, they're not doing anything with this folks, these people. And this is a ticking time bomb. Okay. And everybody's got plants, like I say, the not so good plants. Well,
Yeah.
those not so good plants have those kinds of leaders in them.
Yeah.
Okay. And it may be there's a long line of those leaders and the people we're putting in there can't undo it.
Yeah.
Undoing something of history takes a special type of leader.
Right.
And so I look a lot at that. Um, and I see the results of imbalanced decisions every single day. I walk through every company I walk through, I see them. I'll give you
Right.
an example. I'm walking through a manufacturing facility a couple of years ago with a plant manager, and we're talking about operations, production, challenges, things like that. And we come across this big hole in the floor. Now, this is a hole that was outlined, pretty precisely. It wasn't like somebody dug a hole. It was in the concrete. So
Right.
there was a process there. I knew that,
Right.
but I would just act stupid,
Yeah.
which is easy for me. So it was probably about 6 feet deep, and it had some guardrails around it. And I said to the plant manager, I said, "What's up with this hole?" And he said, he said that's a process we used to have. They moved it to Mexico. I said, "Oh, cool." I said, "Was there money in the process to fill the hole?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Where'd it go?" He said, "Well, when they moved the process to Mexico, the process wasn't running as healthy as it needed to be. So they took that money and invested it into the process in Mexico to get it up and running." So you see what happened here. Okay. So we started off with a relatively decent balance. Okay. Were accountable for that risk. We funded the risk control. But then, so we had balance between what I'll call benefit and risk, relative balance. Then on the benefit side, and we'll always watch the benefit, right? The benefit was not beneficial enough. It wasn't working. Okay. And if you're going to say, I'm going to do all of this to create benefit and your benefit isn't legitimate, you're going to get in trouble. So what do? You figure out how to make it work. Oh, I had some money. I had this whole filling money. I'm just going to use that. Right. So the risk money went to benefit. It went right into making the benefit legitimate. You can see how
Yeah.
that could happen. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I said to the guy, I said, well, where do these guardrails come from? He said, I bought them. I said, out of OpEx, huh? He goes, yeah, out of OpEx. I said, oh, that's a killer. Now, OpEx, financially,
Yeah.
when you're using OpEx money, you're decreasing your profitability, okay,
Yeah.
of your manufacturing because It's direct cost. Okay.
Yeah.
So I said, what were these people expecting you to do? Put a pool in here? Like, come on. I mean, look, it's unusable space, right? You can't get any operational value out of that hole, right? You
Right.
can't use it for adding value to your process. It's a fatality hazard, okay? And then now you're left with unusable operation space and a fatality hazard, and then they expect you to take care of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's imbalance. That's
Yeah.
imbalance, right? And I see that stuff all the time, or the results of it all the time. So if we're not doing that balancing upstream, when it gets to that plant manager, they don't have the
Yeah.
capacity to get
Forget about it.
CapEx
Yeah.
like everybody else does. They can't CapEx their way out of it. So they
Right.
OpEx their way. And when you
Yeah.
OpEx, typically you're buying low-level controls, rules,
Yeah.
procedures, PPE, and training. Yeah, maybe some machine guards or whatever it is, but and that hurts. That hurts a lot to have to spend OpEx on something you weren't expecting to spend it on.
Yeah.
So Um, one of the other situations I'll give you, I have this when I do the training on hazard and risk and recalibration, I have this picture that I put up that if you can visualize it, there's a kind of an operational mezzanine. This is a kind of a chemical process. So you've got this stairs and this mezzanine and these tanks and stuff on top. So it's a two-level process. The mezzanine height's probably about 10 feet. And there's a picture of this forklift lifting up this tank, this portable tank, precariously on these blades. And then this guy underneath this tank sweeping up a mess. And I'll give this slide to the folks and I'll say, identify the serious injury and fatality hazards. That's it, hazards. And then I'll also say, tell me if there's anything in the process here that you don't like, the way that we're doing this work. So they get through the hazards and everything. And then we start talking about controls. And I talk about good day and bad day controls. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I take the whole hierarchy control and I slice it in half. And I say, okay, good day controls. Like, in your car, you got a seatbelt and an airbag. The seatbelt's a good day control. It only works on your good day. When you wear it the right way. It's a choice. Okay, so that's a cold-faced decision, right? Airbag, no choice. Airbag comes at you while you're going at it. You nicely meet in the middle. It's not pleasant, but it's a hell of a lot better than going through the windshield.
Yeah.
And it just does its thing, like that fire sprinkler. It just does its thing. Okay. You don't have to remember, you don't have to be trained, nothing. Okay. And I said, what um, what is and then so they come up with these fatality serious injury hazards. They talk about the forklifts and the different situations can happen. The tank could fall, and that's a fatality hazard. And forklift could hit somebody, that's a fatality hazard. And the forklift could tip over, and they could fall off. There was an open guardrail, so there's a swinging guardrail that somebody tied open up on the top, so somebody could fall off of that. The last thing they say is stairs. Last thing they say is stairs, if they even say stairs. And I'll say to them, the energy from falling from the top of the stair is the same energy as falling from that platform. Why didn't you say stairs?
Right.
Right? Because you see it as a kiddie. You see it as a kiddie. You're so used to stairs. Stairs, everybody's got stairs, right? It's like
Yeah.
gasoline. Everybody uses gasoline. We put gasoline in our car. We're just so used to it. Stuff's nasty. You know,
Yeah.
it really is. Not just flammable, it's toxic. Okay. But we use it every day. We're just comfortable with it, right? We're
Right.
comfortable with some of these things, like kitties, right?
Yeah.
And I say, I'll say to the folks, where did all the fatality hazards come from? And they'll look at me like, what do you mean? It's like, what part of the design of this process creates fatality hazards? And then somebody will say the mezzanine. And I'll say, you're right. I said, no mezzanine, no need to lift anything, no elevated tank, no need for a forklift, no fall hazard. They're all gone. So someone decided that the mezzanine was valuable, a benefit. I said, it was probably an engineer. And engineers, a lot of times, will look at gravity as an opportunity, right? It's
Right.
like, oh, if I put a tank up there and I run it, flow it with gravity, I don't have to have energy. I don't have to pump. I don't have to maintain a pump, right? It saves us money. I got it. Or space, right? If I
Right.
build up, I can do more and less floor space. I got it. I said, I got it. I see the upside of gravity. I said, do you see the downside of gravity?
Yeah.
right? They're so focused on benefit of gravity, they're not looking at risk of gravity. I'm like, look what you created here. Now, I say to these folks, the person that's managing this has 50 people to manage. Do you think he's ever seeing the dynamic of the humans that have to save their own lives out here? Because that's the level of control we have. Be careful, kind of controls. Okay. I said, this is waiting for somebody to die, waiting for somebody to die.
Yeah.
Now, it's not just because of the controls of the hazards, it's because of all of these upstream decisions. How many people we have reporting to a supervisor, how we create fatality hazards and balance them. So it goes all the way back to those leadership folks, and they're having a understanding of how their decisions create this dynamic on the shop floor. So I connect their decision results to reality. And once you can do that, then you can work your way back.
Yeah.
So that's how I do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, so the first two topics that we talked about, not sure if it's 100% accurate to say, but they felt a little bit more tactical, and how a safety professional could identify some of the underlying issues within an organization and bring that up to management as how we can reduce risk and improve safety, and how it can positively impact the business at the same time. So like in my mind, that's kind of tactical. Now you're talking really kind of big picture perspectives, how to change the culture in an organization. This is a little bit more, of a task or responsibility for a
Yeah.
safety professional to take on. So what's your take on integrating that hazard elimination discussion, into the business metrics to gain that leadership buy-in and actually move things forward?
Yeah, and you're right. I believe we've got to be talking to different levels in the OHS profession here, right?
Right.
So if you're an OHS executive or EHS or whatever, way you slice the letters, um, at the top, if you're at the top of the organization, you need to be in the business conversation, okay? And to get those folks at the table with you, thinking about the results of their decisions, it's best to take them out into the floor and look at the processes they've created. And look, maybe their intent wasn't to have this happen, but
Right.
show them reality. So go connect them to reality, because they're looking at metrics all day long. They're not looking at reality, most of them. Okay. Go show them reality. HR, let me go show you the situation of what a new employee is exposed to. I will I will ask the HR folks every time I see them, what does a safe job for a new employee look like? And they'll look at me like, yeah, tell me what your safe jobs are for new employees. Nobody has those. They don't have those. So in 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, we magically make somebody safe in whatever environment we're going to pop them into. Are you kidding me? Okay. So you got to get them thinking about that. It's like, wait a minute, you're right. Okay. We're not really thinking about this. So how do we have to do this? Well, we have to get the operational reality, what we're actually expecting people to do, what their exposures are, the reliability of those controls, because they got to be high reliability controls with low reliability people, right? High reliability control, low reliability people, right? So where is that?
Yeah.
Now, and then we got to say, where do people actually need to be? Why are we bringing people in? What are we asking them to do? We got to think this through. And a lot of companies are like, oh, we need 20 people over here, and because we're patching an operational hole.
Right.
Wait a minute, right? We got to do that in sync with our values and expectations. How do we do that, right? So it's another good example, whether it's supply chain or purchasing or whatever.
Yeah.
What is the operational reality of your decision? And once they can begin to see that, then we can get their interest in being better at that. Okay, the first interest is you got to be responsible for it, right? It's
Right.
got to be part of your job. let me show you how to do that, right? So that's how you do it. You back build it from reality because they don't see reality, they see metrics, and metrics are not all many times representative of the working reality. They're the
Right.
result of it, but they're not the how, right?
Right.
Um, so then we can start getting them to work on hazards, not risk. Okay. Um, and one of the things that I will show folks all the time is in my hierarchy, right? So we've got hazard elimination, severity, for severity reduction, it's hazard prevention first, right? And then all of the hazard related stuff. And the front end, when you're getting to risk, is exposure. Um, what I find a lot of times is I look at the business value for exposure. Okay. The business value for exposure. Why does someone running a machine have to stick their hand in that machine? Why? Prove to me the value of that and prove to me that machine is healthy enough so that person should not have to do that. So I talk about the health of the machine and what people are actually doing to help the health of the machine. There's a lot of unhealthy machines that people are propping up out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And man made machines so that they didn't have to do stuff like that. Okay. So now we're kind of propping up the machine out there in the shop. That's never good. Okay. Taking out jams, taking out stuff, tweaking it all the time. No, that's an unhealthy machine. Now, the problem is, how is the organization seeing machine health? Oh, they may see it by OEE or maintenance, whatever it is. But sometimes that'll blend in across a whole bunch of machines. You're not going to be able to spot that one really bad machine. And especially if all these machines together are giving you enough parts and enough quality that you're not going to go out there and look. And ultimately, that machine's going to catch up with you when what happens? Somebody gets
Right.
hurt. And all of a
Right.
sudden, I mean, I did this fatality or near fatality investigation. This machine that squeezed this lady in a space about that big. She she had alternative controls, lockout, tagout, right? And one of the controls got rerouted based on the fact that the maintenance people need to be inside the machine every day. So the maintenance people put a little key switch in one of her controls. And they left it on, i.e., turning off the door control to get in. So she goes in, she pulls out the gem, the machine moves and squeezes her against the wall in about that much space. Okay, broke her hip. Lucky it didn't kill her. Okay. We back a look at this thing. Well, she had two controls that she was supposed to be doing. She'd never done the first one. She she thought it was just it's redundant. I don't need to cycle stop and open the gate. I'm just going to open the gate. And the gate always worked for her. Now there's an organization that doesn't see risk growing, right? Because they're not watching what she's doing. And she's doing that every day. And then she did it one day with the thing turned off by maintenance because why? That machine's unhealthy and the maintenance people are in there all the time. And she goes in there. Why? Because she's got to pull out a jam and that door switch wasn't working and boom, she could have died. But
Wow.
that was so when I sent the folks back to tell me how healthy the machine was, give me some metrics on how healthy the machine was. The guy said to me, this machine's making good parts 50% of the shift. So 4 hours of the shift, the machine's making good parts. The other the other 4 hours, it's not making good parts or somebody's in the machine trying to get it to make good parts.
Yeah.
That's not a healthy machine, but they
No.
continue to run it. Why? Because it's making enough good parts. Okay. So your organization, your people have to understand this. Maintenance people are just trying to keep things running. They put themselves in pickles to keep things running. Okay.
Right.
And some of these machines don't deserve to be running. They just don't,
Yeah.
right? Don't risk your
Yeah.
life for this, you know, garbage piece of machine here.
Yeah.
Uh, so,
Well, I was gonna say it's like your roller example, or even the
yeah,
guys in the grain elevator. Like they're trying to be the heroes. They're trying to do what's best for the company,
they
right? They're
are.
trying to make money, trying to be productive.
Yeah.
and
And we're
the
setting them
company
up to fail. We're
company
setting them
setting them
up
up
to
to
fail, and nobody's watching this because they're not watching the how. They're measuring the what. Okay, I can say that 1,000 times. That
yeah,
is it. Okay. You got to see how people do things, how healthy the machine is, how healthy the process. You got to see how, because those metrics aren't telling you all that. Okay, until it's too late, frankly, until that rock falls and hits somebody, right? Um, so again, back to the real value of your hazards, real value of your exposures. What is the real value of that exposure? I mean, do we want to risk this person's life every day on hoping that control works?
yeah,
Why? Right? What are we really getting out of that exposure? What are we really getting out of it? And I see that so much out there. So much. There's so much non-value added hazard exposure out there all the time. We need to start making business cases for that. And
yeah,
again, bringing people down from the business to see, look at this. Oh yeah, I get it now. Right.
yeah,
Um, I talk about hazard value. I was just talking about it before. I remember, I remember sitting in a conference room at a plant, and when the plant manager was there, and I hear this boom, boom, boom. I was like, and it shook the whole place. I'm like, whoa, what was that? He goes, that's the sound of money. I said, the sound of money, money's really loud. And money creates a lot of vibration. Money's harming your people, and money is harming your plant. Okay, better be a lot of money. Okay, the sound of money. Okay, you see what that connotes?
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
That noise, that vibration is worth the value. Okay, well, are we balancing those things? Right? Do we have to do it with that much noise? Do we have to do it with that much vibration? Right? Nobody, yeah, they're happy to hear it running.
right,
Yeah, I think that whole value for exposure, I think, is a really good thing to show people when they walk out into the shop because they're meeting their throughput, they see they're meeting their quality. Even though they're having quality escapes, they're making enough. Everybody seems to be metrically happy. Okay. But
right,
the metrics aren't measuring the how. They're not measuring the health of the machine. They're not measuring the non-value added exposures. I mean,
yeah,
every time you do this, it's not just non-machine work. It's risk, right?
yeah,
And as you were asking the question, that's where the business metrics and the safety metrics should be one and the same. They shouldn't be separate metrics. I remember going to Africa to a iron mine in Liberia. Now, Liberia is one of the poorest countries in the world. Some of the nicest people you ever want to meet, but just a poor, poor country. And I'm watching iron being taken out of the mine, dumped into this crusher, and crushed, right? And then it comes down this conveyor belt, we walk down the conveyor belt, and there's like iron all over the ground, right? Stuff that fell off the conveyor. Some of it's pretty good chunks, and it fell pretty high, right? And then I got these guys who have split the conveyor open, and they had an interlock on it, and they're in there scooping out the iron that had fallen off the conveyor. So I'm walking around with the operations manager, and I said, "What's that stuff on the ground they're scooping up?" He said, it's iron ore. I said, no, it's not. It's money. It's money. Now, for some reason, that money is not going from the mine to the railroad car the way it's supposed to. And now, what are we doing? We're going and rescuing money. Okay. It's like you having your own business, right? And you got this really nice convertible that you bought because you're making lots of money. And you put your money in bags on the seat in the convertible, and you're
yeah,
driving from your office to the bank with all your money, right? And you're listening to the radio, you're looking out the windshield, and you get to the bank, and uh-oh, one of the bags opened up and all the money flew out, right? So now you call people from your business to come and walk the streets to pick up your money. That's what they're doing. And at the same time, they're picking up their money, they're exposed to a fatality hazard. in this very spot where this interlock was. The reason for the interlock was somebody lost their arm doing exactly that job. And there's no reason for that job because the money should stay on the conveyor. But they didn't fix that. They put an interlock in there. Okay.
Right.
Fix the problem. Fix the problem. It's a money problem as much as it's a exposure problem, as much as it's a safety problem, right? It's a money issue.
Yeah.
Okay. Fix the problem. And that's where I said to them, here's your new metric, safe tons. So everywhere, we're measuring our throughput by tons of iron ore. So everywhere along the line that ton travels, it needs to be safe, and our standard for safe for our workers until it gets to where it needs to go. So those metrics, you're not making tons unless you're making safe tons, because the reality is you got tons and you got safety. That's two separate metrics. Put them together. Safe ton. What does that look like? What does safe ton look like? And that's when we can start talking. Okay.
Yeah.
So we can't measure a ton unless it's safe. And what does safe look like, right? And then we start to get into it, right? Because when you split them out, you can do this and not do that.
Right.
Again, the fork in the road kind of thing. And that's what these guys are doing. They're risking themselves to rescue dirt. So that connection, right? Create that connection of to reality.
Yeah. Well, I think that's again another fascinating topic. You mentioned what was the next one?
Process health.
Process
measuring
health.
process health.
Yeah. So we definitely have to have you back to talk about that one and go into a little bit more detail. As we were chatting before we came on, the Safeopedia community, we have monthly meetups, and we ask experts like yourself to come and answer questions, because I can, just as you're giving some examples, I can see, our community saying, well, okay, well, what about my facility? What about this type of hazard within my organization, and how do I justify it? So if you've been watching the Safeonomic episodes with Pete and you've been enjoying the topics, watch for the invitation to the Safeopedia community meetup, and we'll bring Pete back maybe next month, and have kind of an open mic to come and ask questions and dive a little deeper. And then we definitely need to schedule a process health episode as well. I think it'll be really important to help kind of put a ribbon on the first 3 episodes that we've done.
Yeah, I think so too. I think because it's very practical. It's very visual.
Yeah.
And it gives the safety professionals something to look for that they can talk business about, not just safety. Right.
Yeah. No, and I like I say, love the topics and the examples, practical, things that people can use. I was thinking pool with the hole in the floor, just like you were. I mean, I'm a swimmer, and if you're gonna have a 6-foot hole in a building,
Right,
that should be filled with water.
Make good use out of it. Exactly.
Still a hazard, but probably not so much a hazard, because you won't, the fall won't do you any damage. It's just whether or not you can swim, I guess. So
right, there you go. There you go.
Yeah. Well, good. Thanks so much, Pete. Like I say, look forward to process health and then having you participate in the community meetup.
Great. I look forward to it too. Bring your questions.
Yeah, bring your questions.